Hey, welcome back to Psychology. We're going to talk about adolescence. Oops. All right. Physical development during adolescent growth spurt, which lasts 2 or 3 years, the average teenager will grow 8 to 12 inches. Many physical changes take place during adolescence, and maturation rates vary among adolescents. So the main idea of this section is adolescence is a time of great change, especially in terms of physical development. So your notes you should be able to answer these questions. What are the three age category labels between childhood and adulthood? What is adolescent growth spurt? And what does sexual development encompass? What difference in maturation rates occur among adolescents? What? In Western societies today, the studies of adulthood have been delayed. Today, adolescence is subdivided into three age categories. Early adolescence, which is 11 to 14, middle adolescence, which is 15 to 18, and late adolescence, which is 18 to 21. The adolescent growth spurt takes place in this time frame. The adolescent growth spurt usually lasts just 2 or 3 years, and during this period, most adolescents will grow 8 to 12 inches. Girls typically begin with the adolescent growth spurt earlier than boys. During middle adolescence, most boys grow taller than their female counterparts, and the exact time this occurs often depends on the individual. This is why oftentimes you'll see the girls are taller than the boys in the 6th grade, but by high school that begins to change. Some teenagers may feel that they look awkward, but they actually tend to be well coordinated during adolescence. Proper nutrition is important during the adolescent years. Throughout childhood, boys and girls in similar height. At puberty, girls surge ahead at about age 14, boys surge back. Sexual development. Adolescence begins with puberty, which refers to development of changes that lead to the ability to reproduce during puberty. Adolescents develop their primary sex characteristics and secondary sex characteristics. Changes that take place in the males are an increased output of testosterone. It causes the boys' sex organs to grow, their voices to deepen, and their body hair to grow. During this period, boys also develop broader shoulders, more muscle tissue, larger hearts, and lungs. In girls, its increased estrogen spurs the growth of breast tissue, the pelvic region also widens, and cyclical production of estrogen regulates their menstrual cycle. This first cycle is called menarche. Sexual changes. Both males and females undergo major physical changes in adolescence. These changes are caused by hormones. Male hormonal changes are the testes increase the output of testosterone, their sexual organs grow, their voice deepens, their hair on their face and chest grow, uh, broader shoulders, thicker body, more muscle, larger heart and lungs, and larger heart and lungs. I wonder why they put that on there twice. All right, so for females, their ovaries begin to secrete more estrogen. The growth of breast tissue grows. The growth of supportive tissue in the hips and buttocks increases. The pelvic region widens, and the hips become rounder. growth in the pubic underarm, and hair and menstruation all take place. Some adolescents reach physical maturity at a relatively early age, while others reach it later. Early maturing boys may have advantages over their peers who develop later, but these advantages seem to fade away over time. Girls who mature early may feel awkward. Once their peers catch up to them, the issue of differences in maturity generally disappears. The adolescent brain is a work in progress. Magnetic resonance imaging have shown that the teenage brain continues to grow to develop through the teen years. With MRIs, researchers can see how the brain really works. They can see what parts of the brain use energy when performing a particular task. Dr. J. Len's MRI studies have confirmed that young people's brains are not fully developed until they reach their early 20s. Late development of the prefrontal cortex is one of the factors in the teens' relatively high rates of injury and accident. The frontal cortex is largely important for our common sense and reasoning and logical formation and decision-making capabilities. And since this is one of the later parts that develop, especially in males, they tend to do particularly rash things. Len's studies help explain why adolescents and young adults engage in riskier behavior than other people, such as drinking, drugs, and driving fast cars, things like that. Some of these behaviors may have as much to do with the brain development as with the hormonal changes of puberty. The hormones, too, will motivate people to do things that they probably wouldn't do otherwise. The amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. The corpus callosum connects the right and left hemispheres, and the prefrontal cortex is essential for determining the consequences of our actions, and the cerebellum controls physical coordination and regulates certain thought processes. And so you'll see that grows from back to front. Social development, section 2. Adolescents typically experience a great deal of stress during their teen years due to both biological and psychological changes. Relationships with their parents change during adolescence, and adolescents turn increasingly to their peers for support during adolescence. So the main idea of this section is the adolescence is a challenging time during which teenagers must learn new social skills and ways of interacting with others. So what two factors make adolescence a time of stress and storm? Will be your main question. And what is the main reason for the relationship with parents change during your adolescence? And why are the relationships with peers so important to adolescents? Storm and stress. Research suggests that hormonal changes of adolescence affect activity levels, mood swings, and aggressive tendencies of many adolescents. However, contemporary studies suggest that cultural and social influences may have more of an effect on adolescent behavior than hormones do. The psychology in adolescence. Psychologically, adolescence ends when people become adults and take on the adult responsibility. How long adolescence lasts varies with each individual. Most teenagers face the many challenges of adolescence and cope with them successfully. Today, it's considered that American children have a very extended period of adolescence, since most of them stay well connected to their parents throughout their early 20s. The quest for independence. The adolescent quest for independence from parents may result in conflicts and less time spent with family, greater emotional attachment to people outside the family, and more activities outside the home. Adolescents who feel close to their parents tend to show greater self-reliance and independence than those who are distanced from their parents. Parents and adolescents usually share similar views. Adolescents tend to interact with their mothers more than they do with their fathers. Adolescent friendships. Adolescent friendships is a very important part of adolescence. Adolescents value loyalty as a key aspect of friendship. Adolescents usually choose friends who are similar to themselves in age, background, educational goals, attitudes toward drinking, drug use, and sexual activity. In fact, most adolescents who grow up in different regions from where perhaps their parents were born will develop the accent of their peers rather than that of their parents. Cliques and crowds. Cliques are peer groups of 5 to 10 people who spend a great deal of time together. So most, if not all of you, belong to some sort of a clique, even though it may not be much of one. Larger groups of people who do not spend as much time together but share attitudes and group identity are called crowds. So you as a class might be considered a crowd, but you and your group of friends are a clique. Parental and peer influences often coincide. Nevertheless, adolescents are influenced by their parents and peers in different ways. Peer pressure increases in middle adolescence and then decreases over age 17. In our middle adolescence, we seek to be accepted by our peers and look for those groups, and as we get older, we start seeking independence, not only from our parents, but from our peers. In younger adolescents, dating relationships tend to be casual, and short-lived. That's why in middle school you might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 boyfriends in a school year, or girlfriends, and by high school that begins to slow down, and by later in maybe by college, it's very few relationships at all. In later adolescence, relationships tend to be more stable and more committed. You spend more time together. One of the main section 3 is identity formation. Teenage years and your 20s are one of the most important points in your life where you start to form your identity. One of the main psychological tasks of adolescence is finding an identity, a sense of who one is and what one stands for. There are 4 categories of adolescent identity status. Issues of gender and ethnicity play a major role in the formation of identity. One of the main tasks of adolescence is the search for identity. So in this section, what you need to know is how do psychologists view identity development, and what is identity status? What roles do gender and ethnicity play in identity formation? Psychologist Eric Erikson maintains the main task of adolescent stage is the search for identity. Erikson believed the task is accomplished by choosing and developing commitment to a particular role or occupation in life. Adolescents may experiment with different values, beliefs, roles, and relationships. Adolescence identity is achieved when different selves are brought together into a unified sense of self. Identity crisis is a key aspect of adolescent identity development. Identity crisis is a turning point in a person's development when a person examines his or her values and makes or changes decisions about life roles. So this is where you might find the person who goes through the goth stage, and then they have their braided hair, and then they have their colored hair, and they do all kinds of things. They might become a holy roller, or then they might become a hellion, depending on which way the person develops. And sometimes people go both ways. They start out one and they end up the other, and then they go back to another. So you never know what's going to happen when they're in this identity search. And you guys, I'm sure, can relate with that, because I'm sure many of you have gone through it yourselves. Adolescents experiencing the identity status known as the identity moratorium They delay making commitments about important questions. Identity foreclosure is to avoid identity crisis. Adolescents in the identity foreclosure category make commitment that forecloses or shuts out other possibilities. Identity refusion seems to be constantly searching for meaning in life because they have not committed themselves to a set of personal beliefs or an occupational path. In identity achievement, adolescents in the identity achievement category have coped with crisis, explored options, committed themselves to an occupational direction, and made decisions about key questions. So identity achievement is hopefully where most of you will be by the end of your senior year. And if not, you'll probably get there sooner or later in your early 20s. By studying how teenagers handle commitment and cope with the adolescent identity crisis, psychologist Jane Marcia identified 4 adolescent identity status categories. Identity moratorium, in which you're searching for exploring alternatives and delaying your commitments. Identity foreclosure, where you're conforming and you're accepting your childhood identity, values, and identifying with others, making commitments and plans without self-examination, becoming inflexible. Identity diffusion is you're making no commitment, no soul-searching, no goals, angry, and rebellious. And then identity achievement is exploring options, committing to a direction in life, occupation, and finding your own identity. So where do you think you're at? Gender and ethnicity. In identity formation, gender and identity formation, research shows that female adolescents are now more apt to approach identity formation similar to the way that male adolescents do. Female adolescents do, however, express more concern about the challenge of balancing work life and family life. Female adolescents seem to become more aware of the fact that the females carry the heavier burden in family life. Ethnicity and identity formation. Identity formation is often complicated for adolescents from ethnic minority groups. Prejudice and discrimination can be contributing factors. Cultural diversity. There are rites of passages mark a person's entrance into a new life stage. Many cultures do this. These ceremonies include baptisms, graduations, marriages, and for many people around the world, there's various rites such as school graduations, weddings, signify one end of period of life and the beginning of another. Most rites of passages have 3 stages: a separation stage, a transitional stage, and a completion stage. Graduation ceremonies are an example of a rite of passage in which individuals participate as a group. A quinceañera is an example of a rite of passage for Hispanic girls. Jewish adolescents enter into the adult religious community with bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs. Genpuka was an ancient rite of passage in Japan, and Poi Seng Long is a rite of passage among the Shan people of Myanmar and Thailand. Section 4. Challenges of adolescence. Adolescents face many challenges during their teen years. Eating disorders can be one of the big problems of adolescence. Substance abuse can cause many diseases and many issues around adolescent sexuality. So in this chapter, or this section, you should be aware of the adolescence is difficult for most teenagers with concerns about friendships, jobs, future careers, and body image among their challenges. And you should be able, at the end of this section, to answer why adolescence is a difficult time, what eating disorders affect adolescents, and how can substance abuse be a challenge for adolescents. What issues surround adolescent sexuality, and how does crime affect adolescents? Adolescence can be a difficult time for some teens. Challenges of adolescence can include school problems, family problems, loneliness, feelings of low self-esteem, and concerns about the future, eating disorders, alcohol abuse, and drug abuse. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder characterized by self-starvation and distorted body image. In the United States, typically it affects young white women of higher socioeconomic status. Bulimia nervosa is a recurrent cycles of binge eating followed by dramatic measures to eliminate food. Great majority of the sufferers are female. Origins of anorexia and bulimia. We believe it's influenced by cultural and social aspects such as the need to conform to a feminine ideal and a family history of eating disorders. The treatments will include counseling, treatment programs, and monitoring. What's believed to originate oftentimes is the fact that people feel a lack of control in their life, and that's why they develop these eating disorders oftentimes. Eating disorders are life-threatening ailments that are characterized by self-starvation and distorted body image. Recurrent cycles of binge eating and dramatic measures to eliminate food. They are especially destructive and in adolescence because the growth spurt makes an adequate nutrition vitally important. So you'll be in this growth spurt phase and you go through these periods of starvation and you will stop your growth in many cases. Symptoms may include excessive dieting, exercise, excessive weight loss, and obsession with food. Behavior is binging, purging, and fasting. Substance abuse is also another problem that many teenagers have to deal with, or adolescents have to deal with. The use of drugs and cigarettes among teenagers increased during the period of the 1990s. The use of cigarettes and marijuana declined to 2001 to 2007. The peer recommendation, parental use, and stress are among the reasons why adolescents try alcohol and other substances. Treatment for these for much substances is detoxification and or counseling therapy. Drug prevention. Most schools offer drug prevention programs that are aimed at stopping the use of alcohol and cigarettes and marijuana. Research on the effectiveness of these programs, however, showed mixed results. The DARE program that was so famous for so long turned out was actually encouraging, well, it didn't necessarily encourage, but resulted in an increase of drug use. Probably substance abuse definition. Substance abuse is the alcohol, drugs, and other substances to alter your mood, done to the point of physical or emotional damage. Addictions may be linked to genetics, but the environment also plays a role. Not everyone who has a genetic inclination will develop an addiction. Not everyone who has an addiction is genetically predisposed. Symptoms may include addiction, aggressive behavior, accidents, impaired judgment, physical symptoms of specific diseases caused by different drugs such as alcohol or nicotine. Behavior, aggression, forgetfulness, drunk driving, erratic judgment are all behaviors that adolescents under the influence of these substances can do. Many adolescents struggle with issues of how and when to express their sexual feelings, but they receive mixed message from their bodies to go ahead and at the same time advice from their parents and other adults advising against early sexual relationships. Biologically, our goal is to reproduce. However, in a modern society, that isn't necessarily the best plan. The media is also a source of messaging about sexual issues. The media oftentimes will trivialize sex and make it seem like it's just a fun recreational activity. About 7.2% of American girls between the ages of 15 and 17 become pregnant each year. teenage pregnancies can be difficult for adolescent mothers. Half of adolescent mothers end up quitting school and going on welfare. Teenage mothers are more likely to give birth to premature babies and babies who are below average weight. And when babies are below average weight, that creates other health issues as well. So there are factors that are contributing to teenage pregnancy: problematic relationships, fights with parents, rebellion against parents, emotional problems, feeling of emptiness and loneliness, problems in school, lack of educational goals, loosening of prohibitions, portrayal of sexual themes in the media, peer pressure, friends engaging in sexual activity, lack of knowledge, misunderstanding, or ignorance about the facts of reproduction. In many states, like North Carolina, they teach that abstinence is the only way to prevent pregnancy, which is the primary way, but we're not allowed to teach you anything but that, which are much more effective methods. The term juvenile delinquency refers to many illegal activities committed by children or adolescents. The most extreme acts include robbery, rape, and homicide. Less serious offenses are known as status offenses, which are illegal only when committed by minors. Buying alcohol, underage person buying alcohol is a status offense since you're not allowed to buy it. Research shows that low-income mothers working outside the home are not factors that contribute to juvenile delinquency. Facts that do contribute to juvenile delinquency include low self-esteem, feelings of alienation and estrangement, behavior problems that began early, lack of affection, a lack of discipline, a use of severe physical punishment in the home, academic issues, peer pressure, family history of criminal behavior. So these things will all help lead to juvenile delinquency. Why isn't it turning? Is that the last one? There. No? That must be the end. I'm sorry. Thought there was more to it than that. All right. So that brings us to a close of Chapter 11, Adolescence. We look forward to talking to you about adulthood in the near future.